anger boiling over in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the first city council meeting since the deadly rally by white supremacists. Protesters accusing city leaders of having blood on their hands for not removing the Confederate statues before the hate groups could rally around them. President Trump, in his speech last night on Afghanistan, acknowledged the nation's racial tensions that he helped inflame. This, as a leader of his own party says the president, quote, messed up with last week's inflammatory comments. Well, a lot to talk about here with our panel. We have Keith Boykin, a former Clinton White House aide and Democratic strategist. Karun Demirjian is a congressional reporter for The Washington Post. Patrick Griffin is a campaign strategist and advisor to 4 presidential campaigns. And, of course, CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large Chris Cillizza. Keith, let me start out with you. I mean, you saw the anger in that room. And then you heard the words of President Trump last night, clearly trying on some level to make amends or start the healing process. Do you think his words last night were enough to begin that healing process, or are people not ready to let go of this yet?
Well, the 2 words I heard a lot last week were moral clarity. And I don't think that the president, even when he tries episodically to speak about an issue from a teleprompter or scripted remarks, is speaking with moral clarity. You can't on one day talk about unity and healing our nation and the next day tweet about how you hate all your enemies and how these people are divisive and how the outside agitators are anti-police. These are the types of mixed messages that the President of the United States is communicating. It's time for the President and John Kelly, the Chief of Staff, if he's capable, to have a heart-to-heart with the American people that's based on sincerity, not based on what the pundits are telling him to do. He needs to really speak to us honestly from what's in his heart. And I fear that what's in his heart is hatred, and that's not a good thing for America.
I mean, Karun, you know, you obviously work at The Washington Post. The Washington Post had this poll out recently, where I think we have it here, we can get it up, of the approval ratings, or lack of approval. 56% of people saying that they disapprove of the president's handling of this situation. What's your read on whether there was any sort of soothing balm in his words last night? Would those numbers be affected, or is this, you know, it's easy to read it from a teleprompter, but what you say, what you do is more important than what you say, almost?
I would be surprised if he could get a, excuse me, if he could get a majority of people to think that he'd handle this well, given what happened last week and the fact that he went back and forth between Saturday and then Monday and then Tuesday and what he said. So there's a lot of people that he's lost already. Last night was a moment for him to try to reset. He did it in a slightly different way by using the forum of the military and the example of the military and the various backgrounds of everybody in the military as a cohesive unit and whole. It's a different approach to this problem, which he hasn't managed to do very convincingly or well, the cleanup with before. And now the question is, does he maintain this going forward? And he's got a campaign-style rally today in Arizona. It's a different environment. It's not quite Twitter, but it's more Twitter-style Trump that would come out in this environment, as opposed to, you know, giving a very serious speech in front of a whole bunch of soldiers. So if he can maintain the line that he struck yesterday, I think he could win some people back for how he's handled this, but he's lost a whole bunch of people because it was such a mess. He had his own party, most people in his own party coming out and either taking a very hard stand of where they stood about white nationalists, or directly repudiating the president, saying, not good enough, you have to do more.
And to that point, Patrick, of course, we heard from Paul Ryan on a town hall with Jake Tapper last night, the Speaker of the House, saying, listen, Trump messed up. And I don't think we often hear that kind of direct critique from Ryan. What was your read on that?
Well, I think the Speaker was right. President Trump did mess up last week. It was a very bad week. Anytime you're creating moral equivalency between white nationalists and others who are equally disgusting, with people who are there to oppose that kind of thing, it gets very, very murky and very bad. And the point is right. The president does have problems in healing to do in his own party. However, I think last night was a very good beginning for this president. I have, on more than one occasion, criticized President Trump for both his tweets and the things he says. Last night was a very solid reset. He used a presidential opportunity to behave presidentially. Even his style and tone last night was, I thought, very un-Trump. I don't know if that's what happens when the president is exposed to a solar eclipse or not. But the Trump we saw last night was very presidential, all about healing, and used this effort in Afghanistan to talk about healing our nation at home first. It was a very good speech for the president. The problem is most of his enemies always go back to that reset point, that de facto point that Trump is a racist. I don't think that's true, even though his behavior last week was not good.
I wanted to draw your attention to, we heard from Vice President Pence this morning on Fox and Friends. Crystal, Liz, I'd love you to listen to some of his thoughts on the issue of statues in Charlottesville, and then we can talk about it after we take a listen.
I'm someone who believes in more monuments, not less monuments. What we ought to do is we ought to remember our history, but we also ought to celebrate the progress that we've made since that history.
I mean, Chris, you heard it there, more monuments, not less monuments. What's the strategy here?
Well, I think everyone from Donald Trump on down understands that a fight over moral relativism between white supremacists and people who are there to protest white supremacy is a stone-cold loser politically. Now, a debate over monuments, which should come down, which should stay up, which should be built, is at least a way to pivot that conversation in a way that is at least worthy of debate, as opposed to 99.999% of the public viewing things one way and Donald Trump viewing things the other way. So you have Pence doing that. Trump did a little bit of it last week, and you do have Trump delivering an odd message out of his mouth, but a message that I think for a lot of Republicans they were very happy to hear, which is a tacit acknowledgement, without saying I'm sorry, that he understands he screwed up the Charlottesville situation. The problem with the Trump presidency thus far, it's been a series of false starts down the presidential road. He gave what I thought was a quite good speech to the bipartisan joint session of Congress, sort of a State of the Union in your first year. But then soon after that, he kind of reverted back to his campaign form. The question is, can he keep it up for any sustained amount of time? Or is this always a reversion back to the mean, which is Donald Trump unbound?
And did you get the feeling, Chris, just very quickly,
Yeah.
that that this was sincere, that this was President Donald Trump speaking from the heart, or that potentially this was a script that was kind of pushed on him by those around him who are only too aware of how destabilizing this whole Charlottesville episode has been?
Well, let me take the coward's way out and say I do think it is hard to know what ultimately motivated him. Was he getting advice from people close to him that Charlottesville was a huge problem in terms of his response to it? Sure. But Donald Trump has gotten advice to do things before and hasn't taken it. To me, the question, look, you got to give him credit for the speech he gave. It was a good speech that hit on the right notes. At the same time, it is impossible to separate what Donald Trump has said and done as a candidate and as a president from that speech last night. Him speaking about love and unity and peace does not jibe with what he has presented as a candidate and as president. Can he do that in a setting that is going to be much more difficult to maintain that kind of tone tonight in Arizona? Can he do it 3 days from now? Can he do it a month from now? Can he take some questions from reporters and do it? Those are the questions that really matter.
They are indeed. We have a lot more to talk about, so guys, stick around, please. After the break, we're going to be discussing President Trump's big campaign-style rally in Arizona. What tone will he strike, and will he pardon former Sheriff Joe Arpaio? We will be right back.
Beyond is a natural